So I want you to know, and I want you to put it on your calendars, that on November 20th, not only are we going to have a Thanksgiving meal with turkey and all the side dishes that you bring, but Ken Brunswick is going to share on November 20th. If you've never heard his story, I encourage you to come. If you have heard his story, I encourage you to come. And I really would like you to use it as an opportunity to invite friends to church, to hear his story about what God has done in his life, what God does in people's lives, and also they get to stay and have food. And so it's a great opportunity for you to invite your friends, maybe that you haven't invited for a while. Give it another shot and see what happens. So that means between now and then, I have 2 opportunities to share with you. And so how are we going to do that? I decided let's do it in 2 parts. Part 1, part 2. Okay? Makes it easy. And so we're going to look at the book, the whole book of Habakkuk, or Habakkuk. And depends on how you want to say it. Chances are I'll say it both ways over the next couple weeks. Because when you look at it, it just doesn't look like a word we know much about. And so I'll try to say Habakkuk, because that's how we normally say it, but who knows, right? So here's what I want you to do. It's easy. We're going to take the first 2 chapters today. There's only 3. For those of you who are like, we're going to take a whole book, there's only 3 chapters. So first 2 chapters today, and on your note-taking guide, there's no title. This is the title, Ponder. P-O-N-D-E-R, Ponder. I'm going to give us time at the end of the service today to ponder. Some of you are going to go, this is weird. I don't sit this long. I'll join you. I don't sit for very long at all, ever. And some of you will be thinking about what you need to do this afternoon, and just give it an opportunity to say, okay, I probably wouldn't do this at home. I'm already here at church. Might as well go ahead and take advantage of these extra minutes to ponder. You're going to get home about the same time anyway, all right? So just relax. It's okay. Ponder. That's what we're going to do today. Ponder. And I'll give you more instruction. It'll sound just like this at the end. During your time of ponder, write on your piece of paper somewhere the things that come to your mind that you can praise God for. Next Sunday, we're going to take chapter 3, and we're going to praise God at the end of the service. And it's going to be you who does that from the time of ponder today. All right? Now let's get there. In the book of Habakkuk, the very first verse, here's what it says, and I do have it up here. The prophecy that Habakkuk the prophet received. If you have differing translations, you may have the oracle that Habakkuk received, which is a cool word. You ought to do a study on oracle and all that means. But if you have a translation that tries to be as literal as possible, the word for prophecy there is closer to the word burden. The burden that Habakkuk the prophet received. I want to give you the setting of this burden. If you want to do some more study this afternoon, you'll want to turn into like 2 Kings, and you'll find out that what happened was there was a king by the name of Josiah. Josiah became king when he was very young. And during the process of him becoming king, they were remodeling the temple, and they found the book of law. Now, basically, that means it's the first part of our Old Testament. Now, many of you have multiple copies of the law in your home. But at that time, no one had copies of the law. It was kept specifically because, it's big and it's handwritten, and there was only just a few copies. And so it had been lost. But Josiah was told, we have a copy. And he read it. And he said, we've been doing things wrong for a long time. And so what Josiah did is he said, God, forgive us. And he began to do some house cleaning. Not only did he bring the temple back, but he threw out all the other stuff, all the bad stuff, Baal, witchcraft, sorcery. He even put to death those who were leading those false religions. That was Josiah. The problem when you read the big picture is so many kings had come before him that were bad that God had already established his discipline for Judah at that time. So even though Josiah was repentant, it was almost too late. Josiah dies in battle, and one of his sons becomes king. In 2 Kings chapter 23, verse 30, it tells us who that is. As Jehoaz, his 23-year-old son, became king, and he only reigned for 3 months. But in that process, verse 32 tells us that he did evil in the eyes of the Lord, just as his predecessors. Not his father, but the ones who came before. But because he died young, a brother of his, or another son of Josiah's, became king as well. He also did evil in the eyes of the Lord, according to 2 Kings chapter 23 and verse 36 and verse 37. And it's right here that I believe that Habakkuk lived and wrote this burden or this oracle that we have. I'm going to tell you what happened. I'm going to tell you 3 times what happened. One's going to be short, one's going to be a little longer, and one's going to be even longer yet, so that we understand the setting of this burden. After Jehoiakim becomes king, during his short reign, the Babylonian king Nebuchadnezzar captures Jehoiakim and takes him to Babylon. You can see it there in 2 Kings chapter 24. This is the recording of what happened. So it's in between the time that, it's right before these verses where Habakkuk writes his letter. Okay, so there's a king in place that's not following God's ways. And then because of all the problems, except for Josiah's short reign, Judah was not following God, and God was going to punish them because of that. And so this is where Habakkuk comes in. So let me just say it again. Habakkuk had experienced revival. He was living during the time of Josiah. He knew what it would be like if a king would follow the Lord's ways. Now, some of us have experienced better days in our country. I don't know if any of us would say we've experienced revival. I think there have been pockets of revival during most of our lifetime, but I don't know if any of you would say that you were around during that time. But maybe you were during a pocket. Maybe your church grew that you grew up in. Maybe there was a move of the Spirit. Maybe your neighborhood changed because of the presence of God. But certainly we remember, Billy Graham Association, crusades and thousands of people coming to the Lord. And we've heard of revivals in Kentucky and stuff, and Asbury College and those type of things that swept across our country in our lifetimes or a little bit before some of us were born. But we remember prayer in school possibly. We remember when it wasn't frowned upon to say you were a Christian. So like Habakkuk, we can remember better days. Habakkuk sees Judah. That is, now the country is divided. And we're talking specifically about Judah. So if I say Israel, I mean Judah. Judah was sliding away from God. And he calls out for help to God, much like many of us are today. We see our country sliding away to God, from God. And he calls out. And then God tells Habakkuk, here's what God tells Habakkuk, is that he is going to use another country to discipline Judah. Habakkuk can hardly believe it. And then God tells him that it's going to be the Babylonians that are going to do it. And then God tells him that the Babylonians are going to eventually get their just dues. And then Habakkuk says it's time to ponder. Let me stretch that out just a little bit so we don't miss it. It's time to ponder even when things aren't working out. It's time to be silent before God, even when God does things differently than we would want Him to do it. How many of you remember, how many of you did, let me ask you this way. How many of you were on vacation with your kids, whether it's two, one's usually not so bad, two or more, and they can't calm down, and the genius in the car, it's usually mom, says, I got an idea, let's play the quiet game. You with me? Now you know the rules of the quiet game. Mom reviews it with the kids. Okay, here's what we're going to do. For the one who can be the quietest the longest, we're going to let you pick where we get to eat. Okay, maybe that's the reward. You know how you win the quiet game? You don't have to be quiet the longest. You just know the rules. And the one main rule is time out. Time in. Did your kids ever do that? And it's quiet for a little while. Time out. You didn't even have to be quiet to win the game. All you had to know is the rule of timeout, which is really cheating. But you thought you were playing it right because you come up with this brilliant rule. Well, in some ways, that's what's happening right here in Judah. Habakkuk is concerned about his people, the people of Israel, that they have kind of taken a time out, that they're ignoring the rules of the Lord, the laws of God. In addition to that, Habakkuk thinks God has taken a time out. So God says, hey, follow me, and if you don't, this is going to be what happens. And Habakkuk is saying, they're not following you, and you're not doing anything. And he says this in verse 4. He puts it this way in chapter 1. Therefore, the law is paralyzed. In other words, it's numb. Nothing's happening. No one is obeying the law. Even God's not even obeying His rules. And justice never prevails. And the wicked hem in the righteous, so that justice is perverted. This is the setting where Habakkuk is. I think it's the setting where you think we are. Where our country is. Not just our country, our world. We look at Russia invading Ukraine and we're like, who's going to stop these people? We look at North Korea shooting off missiles. We look at the leaders of our own country, I think literally getting away with murder. By opening our borders to criminals, by doing whatever they want with abnormal sexual acts, marching for the right to kill babies, the acts of violence, especially in our cities. And we wonder why God doesn't step in and do something. Maybe closer to home. Maybe at your work, you look around and you see people who have never set foot in church. Their mouth curses God almost every sentence. And you think they're getting away with it. It's like they get whatever. They get the raise or they get to drive the big cars or whatever. And you're out there trying to serve the Lord and you just think nothing's going right. And it's almost like in our minds we think God has ignored our situation. So you can associate with Habakkuk. This is the burden. Habakkuk has a burden for his people. And so in chapter 1, with verse 2, he says this, how long, Lord, must I call for help, but you do not listen? Or if I cry out to you violence, but you do not save? Why do you make me look at injustice? Why do you tolerate wrongdoing? Destruction and violence are before me, and there is strife, and conflict abounds. Therefore the law is paralyzed, justice never prevails. The wicked hem in the righteous, and so justice is perverted. And so Habakkuk just puts it out there. And God responds. And God says, I'm going to do something that you're not going to like. I'm going to use your enemy, or Judah's enemy, the Chaldeans or the Babylonians, whatever you want to call them. It would be like us, thinking that our country is godly, but yet they've fallen away in North Korea or China or Iran or somebody. Now, this wasn't a new plan. In Deuteronomy chapter 28, God had told the country of Israel, you're going to go into the promised land, and if you obey me, great. This is back in Deuteronomy 28, early on. But if you don't obey me, I will use other nations to conquer you and to scatter you. So Habakkuk, as a man of the word, knows this can happen. But it's easier to read about it than to experience it. And so now Habakkuk gets this news. He gets this news that God is going to initiate a plan that doesn't make sense, certainly from Habakkuk's point of view. So in verse 12 of chapter 1, I'm jumping ahead just a little bit, but just to give you his feeling, he said, Lord, are you not from everlasting? My God, my Holy One, you will never die. You, Lord, have appointed them to execute judgment. You, my rock, have ordained them to punish. I think there's a question mark there. Obviously, he's not too happy with this. And so Habakkuk is upset, flabbergasted, whatever you want to say. And in verse 5, God says to him, look at the nations and watch, and be utterly dismayed or amazed, for I am going to do something in your days that you would not believe, even if you were told. But I'm going to tell you. And he goes on, I am raising up the Babylonians, that ruthless and impetuous people, who sweep across the whole earth to seize dwellings not their own. They are a feared and dreaded people. They are a law to themselves and promote their own honor. Their horses are swifter than leopards, fiercer than wolves at dusk. Their cavalry gallops headlong, and their horsemen come from afar. They fly like an eagle, swooping to devour. They all come intent on violence. Their hordes advance like a desert wind and gather prisoners like sand. They mock kings, and they scoff at rulers. They laugh at all the fortified cities. By building earthen ramps, they capture them. Then they sweep past like the wind and go on. Guilty people, keep that in mind, but whose own strength is their God. Habakkuk listens. He's not too happy about it, and so he responds to the Lord. Again, in verse 13, your eyes are too evil, too pure to look at evil. You cannot tolerate wrongdoing. Then why do you tolerate this plan? Why are you silent while the wicked swallow up those more righteous than themselves? Isn't it interesting, all of a sudden, Judah doesn't look so bad. Compared to the Babylonians, Judah is a saint. And Habakkuk's trying to pull out all the arguments. God, we're not that bad. But verse 24, you have made people like the fish of the sea, like the sea creatures that have no ruler. The wicked foe pulls all of them up with hooks. And Habakkuk's going to go into this picture of what the Babylonians do. And he catches them in his net, and he gathers them in his dragnet, and so he rejoices and is glad. Therefore he sacrifices to his net and burns incense to his dragnet. For by his net he lives in luxury and enjoys the choicest food. Is he to keep on emptying his net and destroying nations without mercy? In other words, this evil, wicked group of people, this nation, has continued to do this, and you're going to let it happen, and not only are you going to let it happen, but you're going to let it happen to us? Isn't there another way? And then we turn the page to chapter 2. Habakkuk says, I don't really like this, and so I'm going to explain myself. I'm going to express myself, but I will wait. At the top of chapter 2, I will stand at my watch and station myself on the ramparts. And I will look to see what he will say to me and what answer I am to give to this complaint. There is hope here, and the hope is that Habakkuk knows that God will hear his complaint. And Habakkuk knows that God will respond. I need you to hear that God hears us and that God does respond, and we can expect an answer. God does respond to Habakkuk. It's recorded in the next verse. The Lord replies, "Write down the revelation. Make it plain on tablets so that a herald may run with it. For the revelation awaits an appointed time. It speaks of the end and will not prove false. Though it linger, wait for it. It will certainly come and will not delay." In other words, Habakkuk, what I told you is true. I'm not changing my mind. It's coming. I'm not going to tell you exactly when, but don't worry. I will keep my word. It will come. The appointed time was probably that verse that I read to you in 2 Kings, where Babylon does come in and takes the king and people away. Eventually, he lets them come back, but kind of like the Romans during Jesus' time, Babylon rules over them with unfair rules and punishment and stuff. So they're in their country, but they're really not free. Back in chapter 1, verse 17, I'll review with you that Habakkuk asked this question: "Is to he keep on emptying his net and destroying nations without mercy?" And so God wants Habakkuk to know that he's in control. And so very quickly in chapter 2, I'm not going to read all the verses, but very quickly what God is saying to Habakkuk is, I'm taking care of Judah by using the Babylonians, but I'm also taking care of the Babylonians. And so in verse 6, it says, "Woe to him who piles on stolen goods and makes himself wealthy by extortion." And it goes on for a few verses, but what God is saying is, woe to those who practice aggression. In verse 9, he says, "Woe to him who builds his house by unjust gain, setting his nest on high to escape the clutches of ruin." And he's saying, woe to those countries who covet the things of other countries or of their people. Certainly, Babylon did that. In verse 12, "Woe to him who builds a city with bloodshed and establishes a town by injustice." And it goes on to describe violence. Woe to those countries who always rely on violence. In verse 15, "Woe to him who gives drink to his neighbors, pouring it from the wineskin till they are drunk, so that he may gaze on the naked bodies." 16, 17 explain that, but it's basically, woe to those countries who are inhumane, who do not treat their people well. This is serious stuff. There's one more, and it's found in verse 19. "Woe to him who says to wood, 'Come to life,' or to lifeless stone, 'Wake up.'" In other words, woe to countries who worship idols, who don't worship me. You see, God can punish Judah with Babylon, but he will also punish Babylon. In other words, the world is the Lord's. And in verse 20, here is the underlying theme of the first two chapters. The Lord is in his holy temple. Let all the earth be silent before him. God is saying to the nation of Judah, the Lord is in his temple. He will discipline you for the generations of disobedience, but he won't abandon you. The Lord is in his holy temple. He says to the Babylonians, the Lord is in his holy temple. You may think that you're getting away with it, but really you're just a pawn in my hand. You are not going to get away from me. And he says to Habakkuk, Habakkuk, the Lord is in his holy temple. Leave running the world to me. There is a verse in these first 2 chapters that I didn't read yet. If you were reading it for the first time, you would probably pass over it because it doesn't seem to fit with everything we just talked about. But it's actually quoted in the New Testament, I think at least 2 times. It's found in verse 4 of chapter 2. The enemy is puffed up, his desires are not upright. That fits with everything that we've talked about. But here's the second part. The righteous person will live by his faithfulness. In most of your translations it may say, and the righteous live by faith. This is a hidden verse, but it's not to be overlooked. Whatever is happening in the world, the righteous live by faith. Whatever is happening to our country, whether it's a revival or whether it's a sliding immorality and a lack of faith, whether it's discipline from the outside, whatever it is, the righteous are to live by faith. I think that's our call today, to remember that God is in his holy temple and that we are to live by faith. Let all the earth be silent before him. So we're going to do that. Mother Teresa said it this way: God speaks to us in the silence of the heart. She goes on to say, listening is the beginning of prayer. In 1542, there was a man born. He became a priest. He eventually became known as St. John of the Cross. And he said this: silence is God's first language. Those of us have been meeting on Sunday nights, this has been a practice of part of what we've been going through, and we're to be silent with God at least twice a day. It adds up to 8 minutes. 2 minutes before each reading in the morning, and before and after, and then 2 minutes before and after in the evening. So it's about 8 minutes. And the devotionals are great. The lessons are great. You know what the hardest part is? Sitting in silence for 8 minutes. And it's only 2 minutes at a time. Madeleine L'Engle said, deepest communion with God is beyond words. On the other side of silence. I can turn off the TV, I can turn off my phone, but I can't turn off my brain. And those are noises too that we got to get beyond. But God says, I'm on the throne in my holy temple, and the world needs to learn to be silent before me. The psalmist put it this way in Psalm 46, verse 10. Be still and know that I am God. I will be exalted among the nations, Judah or Babylon. I will be exalted in the earth. Why? Because he is God. He is on the throne. He is in control. And we need to learn. We need to learn to live by faith, and it only really comes by sitting in his presence. Psalm 23 is very familiar to us. It says, the Lord is my shepherd, and I shall not want. He makes me lie down in green pastures, and he leads me beside quiet waters. Now, quiet waters would make you think it's water that doesn't make any noise, like a pond. Okay? I don't think that's it. I think what quiet waters is, I was taught one time, and I think this makes sense, that in the country of Israel, especially in the desert where a lot of times they took these sheep, there wasn't much water. And when you found water, it was usually at the bottom of a canyon, which is okay until it rains. And when it rains, there's these flash floods. And so what looked to be good water eventually became raging water and would just wash you away. And so quiet waters means safe waters, waters that is safe to be in. And if a flood's coming, the shepherd's going to let you know to move someplace else. I think that's what quiet waters mean, it's safe water. So we are going to take 10 minutes. That gets you home the same time as if I would have preached longer. And we're going to put on no words, no music, but we do need a little white noise, because what you're going to hear is the clock ticking or your neighbor saying something or whatever, and it's going to be just water, okay? And I'm not going to guide you anything beyond that except for to say, just take time and keep refocusing your mind on the Lord. Something's going to come into your mind. That's okay. Pray about it and keep focused. And then during this time on your sheet, if something comes to your heart about praising Him, write that down. And then maybe you'll share it next week with us, okay? Ponder today, praise next week. Let's sit together in God's presence for a few minutes. What if someone would have come in and said, what are you doing? And you said, nothing. And they would say, aren't you supposed to be doing something? And you're saying, no, because I'm learning that the world is not in my hands and it will not fall apart if I stop. The world is in the Lord's hand. And let everybody pause and ponder before Him. What's really cool about this verse about being in quiet waters is it certainly comes from the introduction of that psalm that says, even though I walk through a dark valley, the righteous will live by faith. Would you stand, and together we will sing. It's in 71. This will be our dismissal. It's not on the screen. He is Lord, He is Lord. He is risen from the dead, and He is Lord. Every knee shall bow, every tongue confess that Jesus Christ is Lord. One more time, then you're dismissed. He is Lord, He is Lord. He is risen from the dead, and He is Lord. Every knee shall bow, every tongue confess that Jesus Christ